Hi everybody, I'm Brent Wilson with Yamaha's Pro Audio division here in Hamamatsu, Japan. Thank you for joining us for this webinar where we'll be providing an overview of how to set up and run your own live streaming system. This has become an increasingly important topic as the global pandemic continues to force our industry to reduce or cancel audience-attended live performances, concerts, and events. So live streaming has gained a new focus and increased importance for sound engineers, rental companies, and event planners. While some countries are attempting to host live events with limited or no spectators, these events aren't able to produce the same revenue streams that we saw before COVID-19. However, creative marketers have been finding ways to generate profits by engaging their audiences online through live streaming. As these types of events and opportunities continue to grow, being able to offer and set up live streams for events is becoming more and more of an essential skill. So throughout this session, we're going to take a look at what a live stream is, what equipment is needed, basic and advanced setups for large and small mixers, how live streaming audio differs from our more familiar front of house mixes, and how to get your video and audio onto your computer and out to your online audience. We'll also look at some of the insights we've received from professional engineers who've worked in the live streaming space, as well as give you a chance to ask some questions at the end of a live Q&A session. So feel free to type your questions into the chat box at any time. We'll do our best to answer all of your questions, but we will be primarily focusing on giving the audio-related questions priority. So with that, let's begin. The information in this webinar is largely based off of our newly released live streaming system setup guides that you can find on the Yamaha website. Simply go to the Yamaha Professional Audio page and select the Training tab at the top. Under the Audioversity banner, go to the Self-Training section and scroll down till you find a list of documents, including the Live Streaming System Setup Guide for small music venues and houses of worship. Inside this guide, you'll find descriptions of the basic equipment you'll need for streaming, system examples, setup guides, tips for live streaming, and more. While we'll be going over the complete audio-video system, we will be mostly focusing on the audio side of the setup. Lighting and video are really quite large and fascinating topics in their own right that we encourage you to continue to research, but we won't have the time to cover them in detail today. Before we get too far into how to create an audio-video system for live streaming, there are a few topics that we need to talk about that can have an impact on your stream no matter what kind of AV equipment you have. So first, let's talk about internet. Your internet connection is your lifeline to your audience. If you're not able to maintain a solid upload of your stream to the internet, it won't matter how great your performance is, since no one outside will be able to see or hear it. Check your internet connection's upload speed, not download speed. Figure out the data speeds required for the audio quality that you'd like to upload, whether that's 1080p, 2K, 4K, or 8K, and make sure that you have around 20% of headroom for your upload bandwidth. Make sure to check your streaming platform's recommended upload speeds for the resolution you'd like to be able to upload, and do a simple speed test online to make sure your system has enough headroom to meet those speeds. If you're connecting to a large network within your organization, take precautions to ensure you can maintain the necessary upload speeds for your stream. Possibly talk to your IT department to create a VLAN for your AV streaming system, or create a dedicated internet line specifically for your AV system. It's also critical to check which streaming services you'll use, whether that's YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Instagram Live, Twitch, Zoom, Teams, WebEx, and find out how their servers will respond to your streaming upload. Since remember that it's not just your network that you're dealing with, but also your internet service provider's server and the streaming platform server that will need to manage the distribution of your live stream. So this is a strong reason to test and rehearse with your live stream to not only listen to the audio mix as it's going out, but to check its overall quality. Next, let's check your computer specs. We need to make sure that your PC is capable of handling the workload of uploading a live stream and is preferably used exclusively for that task, because audio and video are intensive processes and can require machines with higher specifications. Check the system requirements of the audio and video programs that you'll be using to ensure that your computer can handle the workload with a sufficiently powerful CPU, enough RAM, and if you're going to be doing video-intensive editing, also a GPU. New Silicon Macs are also a possibility, but make sure you check all of your essential programs for compatibility first, since these Mac CPUs and chipsets are still extremely new and a lot of audio software won't be able to support them for many more months. If you don't have a PC that is if you don't have a PC that is powerful enough for live streaming, it is possible to use some AV switchers that have built-in streaming encoders so that you can stream directly to the platforms like YouTube Live or Facebook Live and Twitch without needing a computer. And lastly, and probably one of the most important points of our audio discussion today, is the difference between a front-of-house mix and a live stream mix. Most of you are probably comfortable making a front-of-house mix, moving around to listen to the acoustics, adjusting for reverberations, making sure that the bass fills the room and that the vocals are balanced with the other parts. But remember that your front-of-house mix only needs to sound good in that one specific room, and your monitoring mixes only need to sound good to those specific performers. Live streaming mixes, though, need to sound good across a wide variety of listener devices, including smartphones, TVs, laptops, headphones, and home audio systems. So this creates two different sound environments. One with natural room acoustics, reverberations, and speakers that have extended bass ranges, and the other that might feel dry and empty without some added enhancements and adjustments to liven up the mix. And we also haven't factored in how the audio will be affected when it's transferred out over the internet. So we need to take different approaches in equalization, compression, parts balancing, and plugins for each mix. We'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the specific differences a little bit later, but for now, know that when possible, we want to separate our front of house mix, our monitoring mixes, and our live streaming mixes so that we can customize each for their own unique sound environments. With those main points, let's give a little overview of the different components you'll need for your AV system. For today's webinar, we'll focus on the video equipment, audio equipment, and the interfaces that will help you get those online. For video, we'll need one or more cameras, depending on your production, and a video switcher to get the video into your computer. For the camera, we recommend getting the highest quality camera that your budget will allow. Smartphones can provide high quality video, but dedicated video cameras can provide higher quality, faster access and control of zoom, focus, ISO, ND filtering, peaking, and other professional features that can enable you to create a significantly better picture. Search for cameras that have a minimum quality of 1080p and have HDMI and/or SDI outputs to connect to your video switcher. Also note that which type of outputs are on the side of your camera, because depending on the camera, it may have mini HDMI, regular HDMI, or SDI outputs that will need to be compatible with your video switcher. You may also want a tripod to hold your camera, a video monitor in case your camera needs to be far away or so you can check the image's framing, angle, lighting, color, and other visual elements, and also additional lights if you want to enhance the style of your image. So make sure you find a video switcher that meets your production needs as well. We'll be using the ATEM Mini Pro by Blackmagic Design since it's currently one of the most popular interfaces at the moment and provides a pretty comprehensive set of features from its hardware with 4 HDMI inputs, free software, and many tutorial videos can be found online. Once you've prepared all of your video equipment, connected your video sources like your cameras or laptops running PowerPoint to your video switcher, then you can connect your switcher to your PC. For audio, we're going to look at the 3 most common audio setups, which are also laid out in the live streaming guide. First, since we know some venues won't have mixing consoles that connect directly to PCs like our MGP32X, we'll show you how to use an audio interface like the Steinberg UR22 Mark II to get your audio from your mixer into your PC. In this case, we'll use XLR cables to connect our MGP's stereo out or auxiliary outputs to the UR22's channel 1 and 2 inputs. Then we'll connect the UR22 to our PC with a USB cable. The main advantage here is that you can simply use or buy a relatively inexpensive audio interface instead of replacing your existing mixer with a newer, more expensive one. And that's especially useful if your team is already familiar with your current mixer and don't want to learn a new mixing. Since the audio flow in the system is going through multiple devices, remember to check your gain at each stage of the audio flow, as well as the balance between the left and the right channels to get the cleanest possible sound. Depending on your mixer, if you do have both auxiliary and stereo outs, you'll be able to create separate live stream and front of house mixes. If you only have a stereo output though, you'll need to think a little more carefully about how you will mix your audio since it will be the same for both mixes. Now, if you do have a mixer with an internal audio interface like an MG-XU modeled mixer, you can simply plug your mixer directly into your PC with a USB cable. Just like the previous example, these types of mixers will still only output your audio as a stereo left-right signal. However, the advantage here is that you won't have to worry about dialing in the gain for as many devices as there are only 2 devices in your signal chain. In most cases though, the USB output will be the same as the stereo output of your mixer, meaning that your live stream and front of house mixes will be the same. So check your mixer to see how it handles the USB and stereo outputs. Lastly, we'll take a look at Dante, an audio over IP protocol from Audinate that has become an integral part of our Rivage, CL, QL, TF systems. Dante networks are easily set up by simply connecting your various stage boxes and mixers in a daisy chain to your computer. Or if you want to add multiple computers and any other Dante compatible devices, you can plug each device into a layer 2 network switch. Connecting to a network switch or your larger local area network can also make it easier to add more devices to your network later on. It will also allow you more flexibility in where you can place your devices, and it doesn't restrict you to staying in the same room as the performance, which is great for the person mixing the live stream. And we'll explore that a little bit more in just a second as to the advantages. Here, we've set up a Dante network with a CL5 as our front of house mixer, a TF5 as our live stream mixer, a TIO 1608 stage box for our inputs and outputs, and an SWP1 as our network switch. By having 2 mixers, we're able to give our engineers complete and separate control over each of their mixes. As mentioned, this can be great if you want to set up the TF5 and your stream team in a separate room with studio monitors, video switchers, computers for recording, and more. By putting your audio and video data on your venue's LAN, you can also add a simple network switch to the streaming room to give your TF5 access to all the Dante channels you'd need to create a live stream mix. If you are planning to use the front of house CL5 and the streaming TF5 setup, we'll also want to make a brief but very important mention about gain sharing. Remember that the CL5 and TF5 are both getting their input signal from the same TIO 1608. They're sharing and have control over the same inputs. So if either operator adjusts the analog gain for the microphone on channel 1, it will affect the analog gain on both mixes. For gain sharing, it's better to let the front of house CL5, in this case mixer, have control of the gain of the analog gain settings, as they will need to make adjustments when feedback occurs and for adjustments for the monitor mixes. To prevent the live streaming TF5 from accidentally changing the analog gain of any channels and thus affect the front of house mix, you can turn off the head amp control or HA control in the slot setup of the TF5's settings. While this will prevent the TF5 from controlling the analog gain, you will still have the ability to adjust the digital gain of any channel within the TF5. With the computer connected to your Dante network, we can use Dante controller software to see all of the inputs and outputs from each of our devices. Dante controller's matrix style layout makes it easy to choose which channels we'd like to go to, our computer's live stream mix, our console's front of house mix, or both. Another critical piece of software we'll need is Dante Virtual Sound Card. Dante Virtual Sound Card, or DVS, allows our computer to hear the Dante audio channels, so we're able to send the audio out to our live streaming services, or even create multi-track recordings for archiving or post-production processing for future on-demand services. Again, processing audio is a CPU-intensive process, so if you plan to do both live streaming and recording, use separate computers for each task so that you're not overloading a single computer with these mission-critical processes. It's also important to have separate computers if you plan to use multi-stream or streaming on multiple platforms like Facebook Live and YouTube Live at the same time. In most cases, this isn't possible without some specialized hardware, encoders, software, or cloud services. So make sure that you have separate computers in order to do both of those. Now that we've talked about the different ways we can set up our AV system and the advantages of each, let's go back to that deeper discussion about how live streaming audio differs from front of house audio. When we look at the differences between front of house mixes and live streaming mixes, the first thing we need to consider is the environment where the sound is being heard. With front of house mixes, we're generally set up our loudspeakers and subwoofers in large rooms with our audio reflecting off of walls and filling the room with sound. As the sound waves move through the room and collide with each other though, acoustic interference will cause certain frequencies to either increase or decrease, meaning that we'll want to use an EQ to balance them out and make sure that we're able to hear all of the parts and frequencies no matter where we are in the room. EQs are also essential for cutting certain frequencies when or before a feedback loop starts running through the system, speakers and microphones. Additionally, since most rooms will create their own natural reverb, we can generally leave our front of house mix fairly dry without a lot of additional effects on each channel. If we think about our viewers listening to the live streaming mixes though, they're usually listening through headphones, smartphones, laptops, TVs, or home audio systems. And because of that, most listeners won't be able to enjoy the added benefits of the live venue's subwoofers, reverberant room reflections, the wide dynamic range, or an unrestricted frequency range. So our approach to EQ and reverb already needs to be quite different. Since our streaming mix will only include what's directly put into the microphone or inputs, We'll want to add reverb on things like vocals to give our sound some more color and warmth. Our EQ balance will also change since we no longer have to worry about creating feedback loops or the acoustic interference that's created by the room reflections. But we'll also need to adjust our EQ since our listeners' devices probably won't be able to produce the same low frequencies as our subwoofers would. Streaming listeners also won't be surrounded by the sound like they would in a live venue where the mix is basically mono and they can hear all of the parts. With streaming mixes though, just like studio recorded mixes, we want to give each part its own space in the mix. This means we can pan a guitar to the right and pan a bass to the left while keeping the vocals right in the center pocket. So this gives us more opportunity to design our streaming audio for our online listeners. And the last thing to consider when we're thinking about the environment is the experience you want to create for your listeners. In a live venue, listeners can more easily feel the energy of the band, the thumping of the bass from the subs, and the cheering of the people around them. So for live streaming, we need to create some of that ambiance for our listeners. Positioning microphones over the audience in the venue and adding them and your streaming mix into a matrix can be a great way to make your viewers feel connected to the event as they hear the audience cheer, sing along, or just hear what's happening in the venue instead of dead air when transitioning between presenters or songs. Just remember not to put the microphone so close to the audience that you're hearing private conversations while we still want a wide open sound. Next, we need to talk about compression. In a live venue, the distance from our loudest sound to our softest sound, also known as our dynamic range, is much wider and more open since there is more space for the sound to resonate. We're able to hear all of the nuances in the sound as it changes from loud to soft. However, with streaming audio that's played through a variety of devices, especially devices like headphones, those extremes become more pronounced, and with the loud sounds feeling extremely loud and the soft sounds becoming almost inaudible. So for this reason, we need to add a compressor so that those extremes are drawn in to make the dynamic range feel narrower and evening out the average volume so our listeners don't need to repeatedly turn up the volume or down the volume to adjust to those differences and extremes. Luckily, the CL, QL, and Rivage consoles all have the Neve BusComp 369 compressor that can help you even out your streaming audio's sound, making it easier to listen to and hear all the nuances of the sound. But be careful not to add too much compression or you'll lose the dynamic qualities of your sound. Lastly, let's talk about the impact of where you mix your audio. For front of house, it's obviously necessary to be inside the venue so that you can hear how the sound reacts within the space. For mixing for a live stream though, it's almost always better to mix in a different room when possible. Mixing inside the venue can be problematic for a few reasons. First, if you're not listening directly or exclusively to the live stream mix, you might be influenced by the front of house mix, giving you a false sense of what you're really sending out to your viewers. If you must mix in the same room, maybe because you're the only sound engineer there, a good pair of closed back headphones with a flat response connected to an auxiliary out dedicated for your live stream mix will give you the best isolation for listening to that mix. Another trick would be to take a long cable from your auxiliary out and run it to a studio monitor in another room. If you have an iPad running Stage Mix, you could then use that to adjust your auxiliary out's streaming mix between running back and forth for your front of house duties. But make sure that you're only focused on the auxiliary out and not changing the analog gain while doing this, since it will affect your front of house mix. However, again, your best option is still to mix in a separate room. This will give you the opportunity to mix your live stream audio without being influenced by your front of house mix. Being in a separate room also makes it easier to occasionally go online to check the audio and video quality, buffering, or loudness of your live stream. And that way you can make adjustments if there are any issues that rise up. So now that we've discussed what live streaming is and how to connect all the equipment we need to get our streaming system ready, let's walk through the process for getting it online. We've taken time to hold interviews with audio professionals at entertainment companies that specialize in streaming events. The information that we've gathered will help provide you with a framework for how to successfully prepare for and execute a streaming event, whether you're the lone audio engineer on your organization's team or an event company starting to offer streaming as part of your services. This process will work whether you are doing a live stream, meaning as it's being performed, the event is going out live online, or if you're doing an event that is being recorded, edited, and then streamed at a later date. As there are a lot of variables to anticipate when doing streamed events, preparation is critical. So let's work through this process step by step, starting with getting everything organized in the days and weeks before the event. First, find out who's in charge of the PA. If you're the one running the audio and the live stream, this is easy and you can handle things on your own. But if you're part of a team or are just hired to handle the stream, find the A1 audio guy or gal and make a connection with them. Which leads us to number 2. What's the setup? You need to find out from them how the audio system will be set up, how you can connect to it, and how you will connect it to the internet. Is it a small mixer that requires that you bring your own audio interface? Does their mixer have a Dante connection allowing you to connect over a LAN from somewhere else in the building? Or will there be, or can you bring, a second separate mixer dedicated to the streaming mix? Then what's in the stream? So work with the audio engineer to decide which channels will be assigned to the live stream. This is your opportunity to design your streaming mix, including adding audience microphones. And most importantly, discussing how the audio will be shared. Will it be through Dante or directly from a matrix output? Which takes us to number 4, where can I work? So in other words, talking to the venue and or the audio engineer to determine the best place to set up your streaming gear. Will you need to be in the same room to connect directly to the front of house console, or is a Dante connection possible over a LAN? Can you mix in a separate room with speakers, or will you need headphones? And is there a solid and secure internet connection for uploading the stream? So once you've gotten answers to all of these questions, return to the people in charge of the event or your client and let them know your plan and any further decisions that need to be made about the live streaming of their event. This will allow you to set expectations for what can or can't be done, any potential obstacles, and the suggestions you can provide to make their event successful. After all the final decisions are made, visit the venue if that's possible, to talk to them and their staff and the audio engineer so everyone knows what is needed and what to expect on the day of the event. This way, when the event day arrives, everyone can immediately start using the pre-made plans to set up the audio and streaming equipment, including the audience and the other ambient mics, as well as any separate rooms or additional internet equipment. On the event day, once you've set up your equipment and routed all the audio, make sure you use as much rehearsal time as possible to test your system, including not only your audio feeds and any recording equipment, but also your online stream. Setting up a test stream on the platform you'll be using that's separate from your main broadcast will allow you to test your internet connection and the streaming speeds. Also, use this opportunity to listen to your stream across multiple devices, since remember that not all of your listeners will be in a room with professional studio monitors. So have a TV or smartphone ready so you can find an EQ and part mix that works best across all of those devices. Testing your system will also tell if you need to adjust your video or audio sync errors. You can use the input delay on any of the TF, the CL, QL, or Rivage consoles to adjust the audio to match your video feed. Remember that you can also set the delay scale to be adjusted to match with the video frame rate on any of those consoles as well. If your team is also engaging with people on social media during the event, it's also good to check if there is a delay between the live performance and the broadcast. Depending on the platform, this could be anywhere from 1 or 2 seconds or even up to 30 seconds. But it can be good to make sure your team is aware of that expected delay. And this is especially important if there are any interactive elements like a Q&A where the presenter asks viewers to send questions in, and the delay creates an extra minute of waiting on screen before the viewers start sending their questions in. So please send in any of your questions for the session right now. But once you've made all the adjustments and the corrections to your system is ready for the performance. If your role is simply to stream the event out live, make sure you are monitoring the quality of the live stream, not simply the front of house mix, so you know what your online audience is experiencing. If instead your role involves recording the event so that it can be streamed later, integrating a DAW like Nuendo Live can help you capture the multi-track recording of the event so you're able to do post-production editing, mixing, and mastering. So in the setup process, ensure that your recording equipment is also ready and that once the performance is over, secure backups of the data before shutting down your system so your data isn't lost. So as another major point brought up by the streaming engineers we talked to is the difference between professional grade and consumer grade equipment. So when you're setting up your stream, on occasion it has happened you may be asked, or it may be easier to use the equipment that's already on site, including any mixing consoles or audio interfaces. However, it's important to note that not all the equipment will generate the same output signals. In general, the outputs used for consumer-grade audio products will output at a lower -10 dBm meaning for milliwatts, to reduce the amount of interference that kind of creeps into the less expensive unbalanced cables that are used for consumer-grade equipment, while professional-grade audio will output at +4 dBm since there are balanced connections being used that can maintain a higher and cleaner sound. So this difference of 14 dBm between those devices is really an issue for those streaming engineers, since they couldn't just simply set all the equipment to unity gain. They had to make those adjustments. So make sure that you test your equipment, be knowledgeable about what your client will have and how you will adjust those differences in decibels when you arrive for the event. And above all, make sure that the audio that's being broadcast out to your listeners is the sound that you had intended. If you put the effort in to make sure that you've checked your audio at every step of the signal chain, you'll be guaranteed to have a great event. And with that, we'll wrap up things for today and move into our own Q&A portion of this webinar. So please type in your questions now so that we can get to your questions first. And remember that we'll be focusing primarily on the audio side of the streaming workflow, but we'll do our best to answer all of your questions. Thanks again for joining us today. So hi everybody, thanks for sticking with us through the presentation. Hopefully you learned a lot about your systems, how you can put your audio out with your live stream, finding all the different ways to connect them and what you can do with your systems in order to make that as seamless and perfect as possible. So we've been getting a lot of questions from you, so we'll try to do our best to answer all of them. Again, we'll be focusing on the audio questions as we go through. So let's take a look at first question from you guys. We'll see how many we can get through. So first question, is there any suggestion what to do and equipment required so we can split the gain independently between streaming and PA consoles? Thank you very much. That's a good question. So there are, as we kind of discussed earlier in the session, it depends on how you are connecting your equipment. Essentially, the best way to be able to control the gain independently, if you're using Dante, you're using like a CL as your front of house console and the TF as your live streaming, in which case you're using a single RIO to plug your input into that. They would be split between your front of house and your live streaming console. At that point, you'd want to use gain compensation between the two to make them, in order to give them control. But again, the front of house will have your analog gain control, whereas your TF will have its head amp turned off, a head amp control turned off, so that it can control via the digital gain. If you want more independence between them, you want to be able to control the gain on each side. Because again, if you're using gain compensation, whatever you use to adjust the analog gain will also work across the system. So if you want to have them independently, where you can have the front of house and the live streaming separately, you might need something like an active splitter between the two. But active splitters, you're talking about usually for a single channel, you would have that coming into a single channel microphone going into the active splitter, and then having that split out to both consoles would give you more of that independence, where you can use the analog gain to adjust them. But that can be an expensive solution, especially if you're only doing it to two consoles. It'd be simpler just to use the gain compensation that's built in for those Dante consoles. If you are going to have multiple consoles, though, say you have a setup where you're using front of house and live streaming, and you're also doing recording, there are active splitter boxes, which might give you 8 or 16 or 64 channels of splitting, where it would take a single input or up to 8 or 16, 64 inputs and give you 3 or 4 outputs that you can send to different consoles, which can be really useful, again, if you have a larger system that needs multiple recording or consoles, front of house, live streaming, and recording. A lot of times, some of those active splitters will have transformers, which might alter the sound a little bit. So you can actually find transformer-less active splitters in which to send those out. So that would be another way to deal with gain, adjusting the gain independently. But again, you need to have a much larger scale system in order for that budgetary expense to be useful. Otherwise, gain compensation is built right in for two consoles for just front of house and live streaming. It's going to be a much more cost-effective way to handle independent gain control. So hopefully that answered your question. That's good. Let's take a look at another question. So Is it necessary to use external audio interface while A10 Mini Pro has 2 mic and line inputs? Is it necessary to use an external audio interface like, I think they're talking about the UR22 or maybe the AG systems, since the A10 Mini Pro actually has 2 microphone inputs? No, it's not necessary to use an external device depending on your budget and what you want to accomplish. I would say that with the A10 Mini Pro, you're using 1/8 inch or 3.5 millimeter jacks, in which case you're dealing with a slightly lower quality of audio. Also, when that goes into the A10 Mini Pro, then you have to do all of your audio through the A10 Mini software first before it can be put out on the stream. So you're kind of restricted to that software, whereas you might have a better experience with a DAW or whatever software that you're using, possibly DVS Dante Virtual Sound Card, and then using that in your streaming software, whether that's OBS, Open Broadcast Software, or Facebook Live or your YouTube Live. So you're going to get a much better quality signal versus the 1/8 inch jacks if you're using a UR22 or some of the higher level Steinberg products. You'll get a much better signal because those audio interfaces will actually have preamps built into them. So you're going to have, in some cases, the Rupert Neve Designs preamps or just D-pre amps built in. That's going to give you a much better quality signal, as well as it's usually they're XLR, so you're having a locking mechanism built in, so you don't have to worry as much about the 1/8 inch jack accidentally falling out. So that's a good question. So thank you. Good. Let's take a look at another one. Let's see. Which Yamaha console works best for live streaming? So that's kind of depends on what you want it to do or what the needs of your system are. So if you only have one microphone, if you're just doing, a podcast, then an AG03 or 06 will work perfectly. Or if you're doing a podcast while playing guitar, you only need 2 inputs, so AG would be fine. But if you're looking for a little bit more, you may have 4 or 5 or 10 channels. An MG works perfectly for that. Again, you'd be using the USB output and just have a stereo mix, but it's a fairly easy, inexpensive way to get that plugged into your system. And then if you do want to have more channels, possibly you're running a small band or a worship service, you have a large panel of guests that are coming in, then getting like a TF1 or any of the TF systems would also work really well, since you can have Dante and a bunch of built-in features, plugins or EQ that you could also use as well. It kind of just depends on what you want the system to be capable of. So look for whatever you expect in the future you will need, and then buy based on that, testing your system throughout to make sure that you are getting making sure that your system works thoroughly before you're actually sending your stream out. So good question. Let's see. So another question. If I only have one mixing console, so it's a digital console in my venue, can I use the same console for front of house and a live stream mix? Yes or no. It makes it much more difficult if you're doing both at the same time. Especially because if you're using a digital console like one of the TF or CL or QL devices, you only have one screen to work off of. So having having two engineers, since you want to be ideally mixing those separately, where you have front of house and the streaming mix have their own independent mixes, and they're EQ'd differently, that they're mixed differently. The volume levels, the fader levels are going to be different. You would, if you put your live stream mix on an auxiliary, then you need to be changing back and forth between your auxiliary channel and your front of house at the same time, either as a single engineer doing that, which might be a little maddening as you're bouncing back and forth between the two. But if you do have two engineers trying to use the same console, that's not really going to work. So if you have a system like a Ravage system, though, where you do have 2 or 3 screens, then yes, that can work. But again, you're probably using Dante at that point, and you could do a lot of that mixing on your computer using a DAW or using one of the editors in order to do that mixing. So using a single console is possible, but you're going to have a lot of limitations to that. So it might be better to connect a computer so that you have that option of using a DAW or the editor softwares in order to control that stream as it's going out to your audience. So good question. We'll see about LUFs, LUFs, I'll get that in a second. So if you're, okay, let's take it. So if you're not a professional engineer and are running on a low budget, what would be the essential setup to ensure a good quality stream without spending a fortune? So we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. It really depends on what you want or need out of your system and what you eventually think is your eventual goal with your system. If you, again, are only planning to do podcasts, then stay with the AGR 03. If you do need a larger system, you anticipate needing maybe 4 or 5 panelists in your podcast discussion, make sure that you're buying the console that you eventually will need. Otherwise, you're going to go through the process of buying a simple mixer and then going, oh no, I don't have enough channels, and you need to upgrade to the next device up. Oh no, I don't have enough channels. You need to upgrade to the next channel, the next system up. So try to envision how far your audio experience will go, and purchase that based on what your future needs will be, instead of having to continually cycle through buying and selling multiple devices to eventually get where you need. If you can, get a small system and build your viewership up, or build your your audience up, and then you can afford those other things, do that. That's great. But if you can afford to start off with a simple TF1 and then add in, especially with using Dante, you can very easily scale your system later on using Dante for your bigger systems. And that would also work really well. So again, it just depends on your budget and what you consider to be a fortune, and how much you want to invest initially, so that you can reach that point in the future without having to cycle through multiple consoles. Okay, let's take another question. So how should I fix delay delay between sound from the console and from cameras? So that depends on the signal chain. What is happening? Is the audio delayed or is the video delayed? If your video is delayed, then if your video is playing before your audio, then you need to delay the video, pull that back. Usually you can do that within you can do that with the video software that's either from the A10 Mini Pro or whatever video switcher device that you're using. You can do that also in OBS, would also give you that video delay option. So delaying it using those softwares will work. If you have an audio where your audio is ahead of the video, you can use the console to delay the audio. Again, you can do that by channel or for the overall system. That you can do by changing the parameter, either by delaying by millisecond, or if you can line it up with your video, you can change it by frame rate as well, so that it better matches the frame as it's going through the system. Depending on how you are producing your event, if you are doing a recording and then doing post-production and then streaming that video afterwards, you can do that all in post-production, in which case usually you will do what they would call a slate or a clap. Using a clapper to show when the audio and the video should sync together. So giving a visual idea would be using a clap. So the audio, you'll see in the audio a spike in the audio signal right as the clap is happening. So you see the clap, you'll see the spike in the audio, and you just want to match up the video as the person's clapping, the hands are meeting, with that spike in the audio in order to make them match up. So that would be one way to do that if you're doing it in post-production. If you're doing it during a live stream, this again really pushes you to preparing your stream beforehand to make sure that you go through the whole signal chain, checking which devices are causing the delay, if your camera is causing the delay, if your audio is causing the delay, if there's a delay caused because you have a large system set up through Dante and you need to add delay to make sure that the audio is syncing correctly. Going through that process of making sure that your whole streaming setup is prepared and you've worked out all those details beforehand is really, really crucial to making sure that once everything, your video and audio, get into your computer and it's processed in your streaming software, again, OBS or YouTube Live or Facebook Live, Zoom, whatever your system is, that it all matches up. Once it's in your streaming service, if there is some issue with delay, some of those platforms will have options to compensate for that, but it's going to depend on a platform by platform process. So make sure you're doing all your pre-preparation to eliminate that as much as you can, so that your customers aren't experiencing some weird delay or off sync in the audio and video. Good. So I think we're almost out of time. So last question. Unfortunately, I lost that. So is there a way to test for LUFS? Unfortunately, LUFS, LUFs are one thing I hadn't prepared for today. So unfortunately, I'm not able to give a good answer on that. I'm sorry about that. But there are, as with our website, there is the guide that you can read about the streaming services, how to set up your streaming system. I don't believe that we mentioned anything about LUFS in there, but there are a lot of great resources online, YouTube videos that do explain things like LUFs. So do as much research as you can to learn more about that. You can use some of our Audioversity videos to learn more about streaming services and about the different products that we have. You can do more research on our website, as well as our own videos. I don't have one in mind right now to explain for lefts, so sorry about that. Thank you for the question, though. But again, I think that's all of our questions for today. So thank you again for joining us. Please check out our streaming guide, live streaming guide on our website. Again, you can follow the instructions that we had earlier in today. We'll do our best to answer some of those questions in more detail that we received today, and we will send out an email with that information. I'll make sure I give you a good answer on LUFs as well. Thank you again to the team here and for everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We hope you stay safe and healthy and have a great day. All right, thanks.